For example, here when creating a meeting, notice that I use Carbon, which is a built-in, third-party package Laravel ships with, which makes working with dates really easy. And here the date format I introduced in the last module comes into play. I pass this expected format to Carbon to let it know how this should be transformed into a default time I can store in the database. And with that I make sure that I'm always storing the same data format in the database. Besides that, it's pretty similar to creating a new user, but notice that I'm also using the attach method here with the user's relation to add this entry in the pivot table to add the connection between meetings and users. When getting a single meeting, I get all meetings with the users, which basically means that Laravel should eager load the user model data with that meeting. So not only the data contained in this meeting table, but also of the related user table, since I want to output both meeting and user data. And then I use the first or fail method to make sure that if no fitting meeting is found, Laravel will automatically send back an 404 error to the user. So we can test this here, since I haven't created a meeting yet. If I get a single meeting with the ID 1, I get back an 404 error telling me that no meeting was found. Now, of course, the fact that we're seeing detailed error messages here can be changed in the .env file, where the environment can be sent to production and debug messages can be turned off. Now, if I create a meeting, and I'm already passing the data I need here, user ID should be, let's say, 1, since that is the ID of the user I created. A meeting was indeed created. And if I now get this meeting data, and I need the ID 4 since I already tested this with a couple of meetings here in my production, you see that I get the meeting data and no longer the 404 error. When updating a meeting, I first fetch the meeting with the find or fail method to return error if no meeting with the passed ID exists. And then I also check if the user ID passed to this action here or with the request is actually an ID registered for this meeting. This is just an optional check I have here to make sure that only registered users are able to edit or update this meeting. If this is not the case, an error message is sent back. Next, I do pretty much the same as when creating a meeting, just storing the data, however, on that fetched meeting object from the database, and therefore I'm not calling save, but update to, update the data in the database. If that fails, I'm returning an error, otherwise I'm attaching the link, and finally I return a success response. If I try this, and I think it's more interesting to try this out with, let's say, a meeting ID which exists, but a user ID which doesn't exist. So if I add user ID 5, for example, and 4, we get back the error that we're not able to do this because we're not registered. And if I use user ID 1, which is the user in my database, I get back that the meeting was updated successfully. Now, when deleting a meeting, I first also find the meeting or fail if it doesn't exist. Then I fetch all the users attached to that meeting. And I do this because, next step, I detach all users and then I try to delete it. Now, if deleting fails, I will loop through all the users I fetched and reattach them to the meeting, just to make sure that I'm not losing that data in case I am not able to delete the meeting. Then I'm either returning an error response or the response that the meeting was successfully deleted. Now, you might wonder if it doesn't make sense to also check if a user is registered for a meeting before deleting it, so that only registered users are able to delete. Yes, but this is something I will add once authentication is added, since this will give me a clever and easy way to retrieve the user trying to do that. Now, in the registration controller, when creating a new registration, I fetch meeting and user with the find or fail methods. Then I create a dummy message, which I will output as a default, saying that the user is already registered for a meeting, and this message is sent if this check here is successful. Here, I just check if a user with that ID is already existent or registered for this meeting, or connected to the meeting I fetched here. If this is not the case, so the user is not already registered for a meeting, then I attach the user to the meeting with the attach method so that this entry in the pivot table is created and the response is sent back. Also notice, of course, that the unregistered link has the meeting ID of the, meeting used here attached to it or added to it at the end. If I try this out first with the meeting or the user who created this meeting, I should get an error telling me that this user is already registered for the meeting, and this is the case. Also, I get the meeting and the user data as well, the unregistration link. And if I use another user, and I created one behind the scenes here, if I create a user who is not registered, I will get back a message telling me that the user was successfully registered for the meeting. Of course, also with the detailed message about user and meeting. Now, when unregistering a user, this will get a little bit bigger once we add authentication to this application, which allows us to fetch the user trying to unregister. For now, I will just detach all users. And I simply do this by using the detach method on the, user's connection or the user's relation on this meeting. If I try this out, and I registered 2 users if you remembered it, if I unregister from meeting ID 5 in my case here, I get the message that users were unregistered and also data about the meeting. And of course, user here is to be done since this will be coming in the last module of this course. If I now get information about that meeting, you see that it has no users attached to it. Now, of course, as I said, this will change in the last module where only 1 user will be unregistered. But for now, that's great. And all the functionality is now implemented into this application. You're able to create meetings, to update them, to sign up users. And the only things that are missing are the authentication and some user-related things, which will come in the last module of this course.